Like all Sage Accpac applications, to begin configuring the modules or to make global changes, select the Options icon within the Setup icon. Here, settings such as whether to save transaction history, or how items should be costed, or whether fractional quantities should be maintained can be selected. Item structures, locations, and a list of price list codes are also maintained in the Setup section for the Inventory Control module. Account sets determine the General Ledger account number for inventory, as well as various other accounting-related General Ledger accounts. And categories are established to define more sales-related General Ledger accounts, as well as indicate if commissions are tracked, and to define the default sales tax settings for items. The first step to perform when setting up a new inventory control system is to define the item number format. There are two icons that control this. The first is Item Structures, and the second is Segment Codes. Item structures determine the format of an item. This includes which segments pertain to a specific item format, as well as any segment separators. Different items can contain different structures. For example, some items may require a color code, but others may not. Therefore, if a segment is created to control a color code, there is no reason to include the color segment on those items that don't require it. Segment codes are used to identify a valid segment value for those segments requiring validation, as defined within the Setup icon. For example, the only colors necessary for our color segment may be red, green, and blue. Therefore, other colors, if they were entered, would not be acceptable. Let's take a look at Inventory Control Setup Options.
When configuring the Inventory Control module or making global changes to Inventory Control, select IC Setup and then Options. The first page displays the company details as entered within the Company Profile icon discussed within the Financial Management Suite course. The company detail fields are unavailable for edit here because changes are done within the company profile. However, specific inventory control contact and phone information can be entered to indicate that a specific person is responsible for the module. Moving to the processing page, the first field displays the functional currency. This was determined when the database was first established. However, notice the field to the right called multi-currency. If the multi-currency module is installed, and if multi-currency is indicated for use within the company profile icon of Common Services, then multi-currency can be turned on for inventory control transactions. Once this option is selected, it cannot be turned off. That's why it is unavailable for edit on the window here. If multi-currency is selected, then the default rate type is displayed. The rate type determines the exchange rate to use as defined within the currency tables. The next field is Allow Fractional Quantities. This is the switch that identifies the ability to sell a fraction of an item's stocking unit of measure. Be careful with this setting because it is one of those settings that cannot be turned off after it is selected. This setting is probably best explained with an example. Let's say your company is a wine distributor and you want to stock all their wine by the case. As long as you never sell a fraction of a case, then you wouldn't need to turn this feature on. If, however, you occasionally sell a portion of a case or even an individual bottle from a case of, let's say, 12, then this option needs to be selected. This way, you can sell an individual bottle which represents 1/12 of the stocking unit of measure, or 0.833333 cases. If, on the other hand, your stocking unit of measure is bottle, then fractional quantities is not necessary. You can still define a case unit of measure, but it is calculated as a multiplication of the stocking unit of measure and not a division of the stocking unit of measure. To simplify, this option should only be selected to sell a fraction of whatever the stocking unit of measure is for a particular item. When selected, inventory control tracks all numbers with decimal points, even whole numbers up to a total of 6 decimal places. The next option is Allow Items at All Locations. This option stocks items as a default at all the locations that have been added. If this option is selected, simply entering a receipt of an item at the location causes a link between the two to occur. If only one location exists, or if all items are stocked at all locations, then select this option. However, if several warehouses exist and specific items are planned to be stocked at specific warehouses with little overlap, then do not select this option because an item may accidentally be received at a location where it is not to be stocked. Let's look at an example. Let's say you have a warehouse in Aspen, Colorado, and another in Los Angeles, California. Let's also assume you have decided that you do not want to stock snow skis in the Los Angeles warehouse, or for that matter surfboards in the Aspen, Colorado warehouse. By deselecting this option, you can manually identify which items are allowed at which locations. If you attempt to receive an item at a location that is not allowed, an error message is displayed. The Allow Negative Inventory Levels option allows more items to be sold than what actually exists in inventory. This feature might be good for those companies that have items with quick turnover, where items are constantly being shipped that recently arrived on the receiving dock but have not actually been entered as a receipt into inventory yet. Or for those companies where item costs do not fluctuate very often. In any event, even if the cost does fluctuate and negative inventory levels are allowed, Accpac can be instructed to automatically record the correct cost as entered on the receipt, as long as the receipt for the items is posted within the same dynamic processing routine as the shipments, assuming item costs are recorded during dynamic processing, discussed in a later section. The Allow Negative Inventory Levels feature may not be a good choice if item costs constantly fluctuate, because inventory control records the cost of any shipment of items going negative using the item's most recent cost. If the actual cost of the item when it is received into the system at a later date is different, Accpac records the cost correctly for the item that is in stock. However, the accounting entry was already created for those items that were sold previously. An accounting adjustment may need to be made. Allowing negative inventory levels may also distort salesperson commission amounts if they are being tracked by sales margin. The next option, Allow Receipt of Non-Stock Items, allows the entry of a receipt for an item that is often purchased, but normally isn't stocked within inventory, such as special ordered items or items used internally such as printer paper or pens. Selecting this option maintains a list and tracks items for reporting and inquiry purposes, but does not maintain an inventory quantity level. The Keep Transaction History option maintains transaction details of documents that have been processed within inventory control, with the ability to recall them and review them online rather than having them automatically removed and resorting to printed reports. Although saving transaction history does utilize disk space, it is a good idea to select this option so transaction details can be kept for a time period sufficient for auditing or reviewing. Transaction information can be cleared at any time, so maintaining it for at least a short time can be beneficial. The Prompt to Delete during Posting option provides the ability to immediately remove inventory transaction information upon it being posted, rather than it being saved for future review or audit. For example, with this option selected, after entering and posting a receipt batch within inventory control, the system prompts to immediately remove the history of the receipt that was just posted. If it is removed, reference to the receipt does not appear in the transaction history report. If the history is kept, the receipt can be recalled to observe the details. If it's a concern that a transaction might accidentally be deleted, do not select this option and instead allow the system to automatically save the transaction details. The transaction details can always be cleared manually if necessary. The next field, Only Use Defined UOM, forces someone entering items to select from a predefined list of unit of measures. In other words, unit of measures need to be defined, such as each, dozen, case, and so on, for those units of measure that are to be used. If a list is created and later it's determined that box or pallet are needed, they have to be added to the master unit of measure list before they can be assigned to an item. With this option off, the entry of any unit of measure for any item is allowed at any time. Therefore, one item may have each identified with a capital E and a lowercase ACH, while a different item may have each defined as lowercase ea and then a period. You can see there that selecting this option defines a standard. Moving to the right side of the window, there are two fields called Alternate Amount 1 and 2. These fields are optional. However, they can be used to store alternate item cost descriptions or be used as a factor for calculating a tax base. Additionally, they can be used to track item costs using the user-specified costing method. An example used here is landed cost, which will identify what the cost of an item is after customs and/or duty fees are factored in. The default weight unit of measure field determines, as a default, how the weight for items are tracked. Depending on the company, this may be pounds, kilograms, ounces, or if selling liquids, gallons or liters. When an item is added, the default identified here can be accepted or a different weight unit of measure can be entered. The next field determines what happens to any additional cost amounts that have been applied to items on receipt within inventory control in the event an item on receipt is subsequently returned to the vendor. Select prorate to have the additional cost be prorated to other items that were on the original receipt, or select leave to leave the additional cost associated with the item to remain with the item number, even if it means that there is a cost associated with an item with zero quantity. After posting, an adjustment can be made to correct any cost issues. For example, if an inventory receipt contains 3 items, A, B, and C, and item A is returned at a later date, the additional cost allocated to item A either remains with item A by selecting the leave option, or it can be distributed to the other 2 items B and C on the receipt if the prorate option is selected. In this example, if the leave option is selected and item A now contains a zero quantity, the item record contains a cost amount even though there are no items. The cost amount gets readjusted to other item A's when a new receipt is posted for that item later. The next field identifies a default goods in transit location code. Although this is optional, if a location is entered, it becomes the default location automatically when goods in transit item transfers are created. A goods in transit location is a virtual location identifying items that are in transit from one location to another, such as on a truck or ship, that are temporarily not available for shipment. Items residing in a transit location indicate that the item is not sellable. Next, identifying our Accpac should determine the default posting date. The posting date is what determines the fiscal period in year the transaction is assigned when it reaches general ledger. The choices are either document date or session date. Select document date to have the posting date automatically default to the date entered with the transaction. Select Session Date to have the posting date automatically default to the date used when Accpac was started. Regardless of the option selected, Accpac displays the appropriate fiscal period and year from the financial calendar based on the posting date. The posting date, of course, can be changed. This just determines the default. The lower portion of the window identifies how item statistics are to be tracked. First of all, are they kept? Which, if deselected, there are no other decisions to make. With the option selected, statistics for both sales and transactions can be kept for items, such as how many items were sold in a specific time frame, or what the item sales and cost amounts are. Statistical information can also be modified. The time frame to track statistics is determined by the answers in the Accumulate By and Period Type fields. For Accumulate By, statistics can be tracked by calendar year or fiscal year. And for Period Type, from weekly through annually. When establishing a new database, it may be necessary to edit the statistical amounts. This way, statistical values can be entered for previous periods. Normally, this option is not selected after the system is up and running because Accpac automatically updates the values as transactions are entered and posted. One other point regarding statistics is that statistical values should not be changed within the middle of the year. The reason is because the existing historical information that is already posted will not match the new criteria. For example, if you were tracking statistics monthly and then elected to change it to weekly, what was month 1, 2, and 3 is now week 1, 2, and 3, so future periods do not have the same time frame as previous posted periods for comparison. The Items page identifies the segments necessary to create items. In the example here, category, style, color, among others have already been added. For another company, size, pattern, and product type might be required. By identifying item segments, it indicates the ability to report on or inquire on specific segments of the item format. Depending on the edition of Accpac purchased, from 1 to 10 item segments can be created. Identify the length of the segment, from 1 to 24 characters, and whether the segment will be validated against a required list of choices. If a segment is validated, like the color segment is here, it indicates that someone entering items must enter a valid color choice, such as yellow, green, or blue, in order for an item to be added. By validating a segment, it keeps users from adding items that don't exist. For example, if red was not a valid choice, the item cannot be saved using the red code and instead requires selection to be made from a list of valid choices. Any one item's total length can be no more than 24 characters. This includes any segment separators which happen to be identified in the lower left portion of this window. This section determines which special characters to allow as segment separators. Selecting No next to the character indicates that the character can be used as part of an item number and not used as a segment separator, so plan accordingly. The Documents page determines the length of each document number for each available document type, and if the specific prefix characters are to precede the number. The system uses the designated next number as the starting point and increments from there for each document. The length of any document number can be up to 22 characters, including the prefix. This window also displays the sequential day-end number. This number begins at 1 and increments from there. The lower portion of the window displays the aging periods. These are used as the defaults when printing aged inventory reports. The Costing page determines when Accpac is to update the cost of items affected by receipts, shipments, adjustments, transfers, and assemblies. The choices are either day-end processing or posting. Selecting day-end processing indicates to update the cost of all item transactions when the day-end processing function is performed. Up until this function is performed, the cost values from transactions are stored in a temporary file. The posting option instructs inventory to update the cost immediately upon posting a transaction. In other words, the cost of an item is immediately reflected when a shipment, a receipt, a transfer, or any other transaction entered within inventory is posted. So what's the better choice? Well, it depends. Having this option set to posting does allow a real-time cost value to be calculated, so at any time, the cost basis for any item can be observed. However, if the inventory turnover is high, or if inventory levels are allowed to go negative, the system will use the most recent cost as the cost for those items, because the actual cost may not be updated yet. In those situations, if this option is set to posting, then the most recent cost value is reflected as the cost of the item. When the receipt for the item is posted later, if the cost on that receipt is different from the item's previously recorded most recent cost, then a cost mismatch exists, and an adjustment may need to be made. However, when selecting day-end processing as the cost update choice, using the same scenario, the newly received cost value replaces the previously assigned most recent cost value, and the actual cost value used on the earlier sale is correct. Of course, this assumes that the shipment and receipt both occur within the same day-end processing routine. The last field on this window displays when subledger transactions and statistical information are to be updated. If the cost items during option is set to during posting, optionally set the subledger and statistical switch to either during posting or during day-end processing. Normally, if the cost items during option is set to during posting, this option is set to during day-end processing to increase the performance of posting transactions. If the cost items during option is set to day-end processing, this last field must match, so day-end processing is the only choice.
Next, let's look at the GL integration icon.